At SEATINI, we do advocacy around trade, around fiscal issues, but also investment policy. And at the heart of what we do is the pursuit for the right to dignity, the right to livelihood of citizens. And the work that we do work here in Uganda, but also at the East African community level. And litigation, which is the idea of what entails going to court, is really one of those things that organizations, individuals do when they are pursuing the protection of the rights of certain individuals if there are rights that have been violated. So aside from the advocacy, because like for example for the workers' rights issue, prior to filing the case in court, we engaged in advocacy. So we organized meetings with members of parliament, but also engaged the Human Rights Commission, Ministry of Gender, Labor and Social Development. However, because we did not seem to be getting what we were pushing for, we decided, okay, maybe let us utilize, engage another arm of government. Because you know that in government, there's the executive, there's the judiciary, and then there's the legislature. So we engaged parliament, but also we engaged the executive. So for example, the Ministry of Gender is part of the executive. And then, so we decided, let's engage the judiciary. That is why we went to court.
Okay, maybe before we get to the significance of why you could have gone to court, what does SEATINI stand for? Well, what makes you different from the rest of the other companies or organizations? Okay,
that's a very good question. SEATINI is Southern and Eastern Africa Trade Information and Negotiations Institute. And like I said, we work to influence investment, trade, and fiscal policy processes and negotiations at national and regional level. And when I talk about, because there are so many people who may not be familiar about negotiations, Uganda engages in a number of trade and trade-related negotiations that ultimately subject the country or the government to certain commitments. But also because certain commitments are positive for our own benefit, but then certain commitments are also for certain sections of individuals. So for example, investors, the government has signed bilateral investment treaties, but it has also signed trade agreements. So for example, the multilateral trade agreement at the WTO, but also the East African community is also another regional trade agreement. So we engage in all those different processes, also at the national level, influencing the policy process, the tax process, trade policy processes, to ensure that the interests of the most marginalized individuals in society are taken into account. Because in the end, what we want to see is a strong Africa in world trade, but also we want to see improved livelihoods. Okay.
So as we talk right now, the state of casual workers in Uganda during COVID is very, very alarming. What explains that?
Like I was saying that some of the most marginalized, when we talk about some of the most marginalized individuals, what are we talking about? So for example, small-scale farmers, and then like the question you have asked, the casual workers. And why we consider them most marginalized is that even the legal framework does not provide for protection of those individuals' rights, because it does not even recognize them. So for example, because when you talk about a worker, the legal framework that protects your rights as a worker, as an employee, or that regulates the way your employer will treat you at the workplace is the Employment Act. But the Employment Act does not speak about casualization of labor. And yet there are so many people in Uganda who have actually been subjected to casualization. And when we talk about casualization, we are saying those people who work without contracts. And when we talk about the COVID period, it's really the lockdown, because the lockdown has resulted into so many unprecedented situations. So for example, when you look at the situation of casual workers, someone who did not have a contract with their employer in this situation of lockdown was very at risk of being sent away. And for example, within the flower farms alone, up to 500 women workers have been sent away. When you look at the sugarcane plantations, because actually what happens in most of these investment schemes, and I will speak of the sugarcane plantation because that is one where we have done research and we have confirmed that these companies rely on third-party employers. So they get a contracting company which will hire some workers, and then they are given, for example, they can get a contract to say provide cleaning services, or to work in the flower farms, because aside from running sugarcane, aside from producing sugar, there are some companies like, for example, Lugazi, which also produce grow flowers. So there are those arrangements, and these companies do not give these people who they bring on board to work any contracts. Okay. So when the COVID period, when the COVID pandemic hit, and people, and then we were sent into lockdown, a lot of people were laid off. Also because of the arrangement that these people walk to work, they come from outside. So because of that, the companies could not sustain because of the regulations that had been put in place. So a lot of people have lost their jobs. And why we are very concerned is that even prior to this situation, to this pandemic and the lockdown, these people had already been subjected to not very good conditions. So for example, a woman has to wake up as early as 5 a.m., 4 a.m. to walk 2 kilometers to where they are going to work. So for example, if she's working in a plantation and she's digging, and in those plantations, what's interesting is that these companies have not taken the responsibility to ensure that they are safe for the workers. So for example, one of the things that these women have shared with us is that they get to these plantations and they find folks. And so they have to, while you're working, you have to deal with ensuring that it does not harm you. So you send it away or you kill it, okay, so that you can be able to work. But also, sometimes they find dead bodies. So someone was killed and dumped there, and they have to deal with that as well. So the situation of work is so appalling. And we think that the situation is the way it is because a lot of Ugandans are poor, and you will ask someone, why would you continue working in this situation? And they are saying, it's because I need an income to sustain my family.
You seem to be concentrating on the rights of workers entirely. Do the people you're fighting for anyway know their rights as workers?
That's a good question. And a lot of sensitization needs to be done, okay, because there are so many people who don't know their rights. So for example, even the right to have, to demand for a contract.
And what are their rights? Yeah.
So the right to demand for a contract, and someone will come and looking for a job, and they'll be told, oh, you can start tomorrow, you'll be earning 5,000 shillings every day.
Because of the desperation.
Because of the desperation, they will accept without even having to sign a contract. There are some who have been given contracts, but they do not know that they have a right to read through the contract before they sign it. So, and then some of them who have demanded are often apprehended and they are told, no, first sign and then you will go and do what? And
so they
read
end up
it.
signing something.
So they end up signing, yes. And this is very common within the hair extension factories. A lot of the women there shared that they often sign, they are told to sign first before they read through. And the reason why this situation is like this, because this is a question that you asked a few minutes ago.
Yes.
The situation is the way it is because when you look at investment and investment policy frameworks, because government's first intention is to attract investment, the investment policy frameworks are designed in such a way that they protect the rights of investors.
More than the Ugandans.
More than the rights of the citizens, to the extent that there are even, for example, bilateral investment treaties that Uganda has signed, say for example, with the Netherlands, and investors are even given the right to sue the government if they feel that their rights are being violated. So that's the extent. So you find that even government finds it challenging to put in place certain legal frameworks. So for example, a legal framework like the minimum wage, government would be concerned, would not be comfortable putting in place such a legal framework because they think or they anticipate that certain investors could sue them because of doing such a thing. So that's the challenge with investment legal frameworks. They are designed to protect the rights of investors at the expense of the citizens. So that's one of the things that we are saying and have always been saying, that government needs to review some of these things, needs to ensure. The good thing actually is that we raised this concern when government was amending the Investment Code Act, and we applaud government for that, that they took into account ensuring that they remove this particular provision that allows investors to sue the government. But we have those other legal frameworks like the investment treaties that still, even their investment contracts. So like for example, the public-private partnerships where government is partnering with the private sector, but it still gives the private sector the right to sue it if it feels that its rights are being violated.